Every time Honkai Star Rail releases a man, his hair is 5 inches longer than the last one, which is above average by the way. I think in Argenti's case though, he just borrowed his length from D-Luke. Speaking of borrowing, I want to know where he got that outfit because he looks fly as hell. Tristan is the first fake character added to Honkai Star Rail, except in this game he opens his eyes and does decent damage. And today I'm going to be teaching you how to build him, including best relics, light cones, teams, and more. If you like these kinds of videos, consider subbing to the channel, and no, I don't mean subbing like you would for all the upcoming characters. My name is Braxophone, and let's talk about Argenti. Now, I know what you're thinking. This guy has knight armor, so surely he's got a sword and shield and is a part of the preservation path, right? Nope, he's been polearmified like engine characters, and actually his path is dog shit. Air Edition characters don't really have a good rep in Star Rail. Not because they're bad conceptually, but mostly because the content doesn't really favor them. And also, they're kind of a mixed bag. Right now, optimal units are destruction path because we spend a lot of time in 2 to 3 enemy combat and sometimes 4. Air Edition characters are typically tuned to only be competitive with destruction in 5 enemy combat. Argenti takes all of that and throws it out the window. His damage is pretty solid overall, even for a character that's meant to be in the credit mines. First off, his basic attack is single target, and you never want to use it. However, his skill is a 5 target AoE, and you always want to use it, because hitting 5 enemies is better than hitting 1. Argenti's gimmick that's newer to the game is his 2-tier ultimate ability, which lets you ultimate at either 90 or 180 energy. The difference in his ultimates is basically just a large damage increase. With his 180 cost ultimate, he does a bunch more instances of damage, and the initial multiplier is higher than his 90 cost one. An overwhelming majority of the time, you're going to want to use his 180 cost ultimate, but if you need to quickly clean up a wave to clear a cycle faster, his 90 cost ultimate can still be useful. What makes Argenti really stand out from other Air Edition characters though, is that his ult animation takes like a tenth of a second, so he's actually really good for farming. Argenti's talent is sort of just a blanket buff that ramps up. For every enemy hit by a basic attack, skill, or ultimate from Argenti, he gets 3 bonus energy and also gains a stack of crit rate. In combat with 5 enemies, you can get up to 15 extra energy on his skill or even on his ultimate, which makes him really excel where there's more enemies. If you max out his talent, he can get 25% crit rate by himself pretty quick, especially since this is for every enemy hit, not every use. There's no timer on the stacks. You can basically keep them forever. You're just going to ramp them up throughout the rest of the fight. There's also other buffs from his traces like Generosity, which gives your husband 2 energy whenever an enemy enters battle. For waves of 5 enemies, it's a free 10 energy. His other traces are 1 talent stack every Argenti turn and 15% more damage dealt to enemies below 50% HP, which makes him good at executing. His technique impairs enemies, and when they're attacked, it gives them some bonus energy and deals damage right at the start of the battle. With Tristan being the first limited AoE physical character, he retires Kalis Chad McThundercock to the backline, where the most you'll hear about him is in an AO3 fanfiction. Your husband is a decent overall character, and he's not too complicated to build either. So let's talk about that next. Like other red-haired characters in this game, Argenti wants the Streetwise boxing set. The only place where that rule isn't true is for the gender bent version. But with that said, you can also give him 2-piece physical damage bonus, 2-piece attack bonus, or 2-piece speed bonus sets. All of those will be fine, and they're pretty competitive with each other. Against quantum weak enemies, 4-piece Genius of Brilliant Stars is also going to be pretty solid, and even against not quantum weak enemies, it's not too bad. For planar sets, I don't remember what this one is called, but it sounds like a Destiny raid boss name. It's going to be his best set since it gives him a decent attack bonus and free damage percent just for having a speed high. If you play him with speed enhancing supports, it gets even better. But you can also play other sets like Rudolent Arena, Space Healing Station, and Inert Salsado if you already have sets of those. For main stats, pretty straightforward DPS stuff, crit rate or damage body piece, speed or attack boots, a physical damage orb, and an attack percent or energy regen rope. For the crit body piece, you want to aim for a 1-to-2 crit ratio of crit rate to crit damage, so pick whichever body piece makes building him easier. For boots, speed is my preference, but attack can be okay. Physical damage orb is going to be the best pick for damage, and for his rope, it really depends on the content. In content with lots of waves of lower level enemies, ER rope can be better because it gets you more value from defeating enemies, but when you're against strong boss enemies, attack percent can actually be better. I would just pick the ones with the better substats ultimately, which is definitely going to be an attack percent rope because nobody in this game has ever seen an ER rope. Gender bent Himiko is honestly not hard to build at all. The only downside is that if you haven't played another physical unit, you might have to go farm some of that stuff now. But now that half the build is done, let's talk about the other half, which is going to be light cones. Because there's no Erudition Herda Light Cone, there's not an easy free-to-play weapon to slap on Argenti to max his damage, but there are some okay options without spending too, which I'll get to in a little bit. For those of you down bad enough to open your wallet for this gorgeous man, his signature Light Cone is his best option since it gives a huge crit damage bonus and increases his ultimate damage by a percentage of his max energy. His Light Cone is basically his noble phantasm, it adds a lot of damage. The next best thing is going to be Jingyuan's Light Cone because beautiful men share Light Cones with each other. Another Peaceful Day is his best 4-star Light Cone, especially at S5 where it takes 0.4% of his max energy to turn into damage bonus. It's limited to 160 energy max, but you're still looking at 64% damage bonus for nothing at S5 and 32% at S1. Genius Propose is a solid choice as well. Himiko's Light Cone is also fine, and if the game punished you with that Light Cone on your standard pulls, you now have a red-haired character to throw it on that does damage. Make the World Clamor is actually decent on Argenti because of the ult damage bonus. And lastly, for free-to-play players, your go-to until you get something better is going to be the seriousness of breakfast. Here's a chart comparing Light Cone value on Argenti. If we get an Erudition Light Cone in the future that gives a bunch of energy, that one might come out on top, but for now, these are his best options. The only reason I didn't mention Passkey is because Passkey's base stats are so low that it ends up being pretty counterintuitive. Even though you can get more ultimates with Argenti, the stats that you lose are not worth the exchange of energy. Welcome to the team section for Argentina, where we're going to talk about all the best Argentinian teams. The first thing I want to showcase with Argenti is going to be Bronya and Ho-Ho together. Bronya has always been a very good unit to pair with damage dealers because she increases their damage dealt by a fair bit, but she also allows you to get more actions because she can action forward your teammates by 100%, and more actions is more energy, so pairing Bronya with Argenti is going to be fantastic. Hanya is the new physical support unit, and she's pretty good with most characters that are damage dealers. Her ability to buff ally speed, give them an attack bonus, and give a skill point refund makes her an overall SP positive character, which if you're playing Argenti and Bronya together, both those characters want to use their skill like all the time, so having Hanya be SP positive is really good. And then in the 4th slot, you can play any healer or preservation unit if you want to, but I actually like Ho-Ho here because Ho-Ho is an amazing pairing for Argenti. With Ho-Ho's ult, you get percent energy back to your entire team. This percentage at talent level 10 is going to be 20%, and Ho-Ho is restoring 20% of Argenti's max energy, which is 20% of 180, which is 36 energy total. So Ho-Ho is one of his best pairings. Speaking of giving energy, the next team is going to feature Tingyun, who can give you a ton of energy with her ultimate. Her ultimate's going to give a huge damage bonus to whoever is targeted, and then that target is going to gain 50 energy to the bank or 60 if you have her E6. Tingyun is also a very SP positive character. The faster you build her, the more SP you can generate because her buff is based on the amount of turns that your DPS takes and not the amount of turns that she takes. Because she's SP positive, you can play her with Bronya, and then another very SP positive character, Lotcha, who basically never has to use a skill unless you're in an emergency. And even then he has emergency heals, which is part of the reason why you don't have to use a skill in the first place. But yeah, this team overall is going to be pretty solid. It's what you can run with a lot of hyper carries, and it works for Argenti as well. The next team also features Bronya. I'm sorry if you don't have Bronya. Pela is a very SP positive character unless you play her on auto battle, which for some reason only uses her skill. She basically never has to skill unless you need to quickly get her ult up or unless you need to remove a buff from the enemy. So pairing her with Bronya and Argenti is going to be really helpful, and then having Fushuan in the last spot is going to give Argenti some more crit rate, which he already has a ton of from his talent, so you don't even have to get super lucky on his relics to be able to crit consistently. And Fushuan is basically a solo sustain unit. She's amazing. Overall, between Pela's defense shred, Bronya's damage buff, and Argenti's self buffs, this team is pretty strong, especially in AoE because Pela has AoE defense shred, and of course Argenti is an AoE damage dealer. In the last spot, I took out Bronya because I figured you guys would probably complain if I didn't. In this team, we're running Asta instead of Bronya. Asta is going to be a character that still wants to use her skill pretty often if you want to try to get close to 100% uptime with her. You can only get 100% uptime under very specific conditions, but under those conditions, it's very helpful, and if not 100%, you can get close to 100% uptime with her. And with Hanya's speed boost as well, Argenti is going to be able to attack very frequently and very fast, build up ultimates faster, and ultimately just clear the content. The downside of running Asta here is that she has a party-wide attack buff, and your other characters aren't taking a ton of advantage of that. Hanya can deal some decent damage, but most of the time running Bronya is just going to be better. This team also has a lot of physical coverage, which is kind of what I was going for. If you're in content that needs a lot of physical damage, going for a team like that can also be fine, or you can replace Asta with Silverwolf, but this is actually one of the few characters I wouldn't recommend Silverwolf with, specifically because Silverwolf is a single target character, and any content you're going to be using Argenti in is going to be many enemies at a time, in which case Pela is better like 99% of the time. But with that said, play the game how you want. It's really not that deep. So I don't know if you could tell from that last section, but I'm really sick and my voice is kind of gone, and it's going to get even worse tomorrow, so I'm trying to force myself to record today. I'm going to skip the Eidolons section. Let's just talk about E1 and E2 specifically, and if you should get those or his light cone. If you like throwing money at pixels, then you're probably wondering which is going to be better. The TLDR is that his E1 gives him up to 40% total crit damage from his talent stacks, and his E2 gives him a huge attack buff when he ults and there's 3 or more targets. Both of those Eidolons are going to add a bit of damage, but going for his light cone is going to add a drastic difference in damage from his other light cone options. And it's actually more worth it to have a solid erudition light cone that adds more damage to him that can also be used on him and others, rather than a slight damage increase from his Eidolon. Trust me, if you want to see him naked, just go to Star Rail Station to see his arts there, or that other website. Like and subscribe because I'm sick.